One. Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Lagerquist. We're here at Vine Faith in Action in Mankato. And today we get to take a little look behind the scenes or behind the curtain or the robe, so to speak, of our judicial system. We have a semi-retired judge. He was just telling us that he's been pulled into action a little bit with the COVID situation to continue to uh, adjudicate, I guess, in court. But Bradley Walker, if you want to start, you can start with just a little introduction and where you served and what that included, and then launch into what you've said you've done not a trillion times, but quite a few times through the years.
You're right. It has been for quite a while. Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us today. Just a quick background. Brad Walker. I live here in North Mankato with my wife, Karen, and uh, I grew up on a farm in north of Lake Crystal, great grandpa's farm, and went to Gustavus and then law school. Spent 4 years active and a total of 32 years in the Marine Corps, and retired as a colonel. And then I practiced law in Mankato from the time I got off active duty until 1998, when I was appointed to the bench here in the state. But most of the time I was chambered in Blue Earth County, Mankato. So I've been here literally all my life in this general area, and I know some faces, and I've heard from some of you that you've got some connection with us or the family or wife or something like that. We've got a pretty small group, so don't be bashful about asking questions. It sometimes makes it a lot easier for me to go through things like that. So just, again, a little process on how you become a judge. Generally, when there's an opening because of retirement or could be a death or something like that, or a new position opens up, there's a group that is appointed by the governor and the Supreme Court called the Judicial Selection Commission. And they interview folks that are interested in the position, look at resumes, talk to references and everything like that. Ultimately make a determination who might be qualified and fit the bill. There's an interview process with that group, and then ultimately with the governor, and the governor makes a selection. You're appointed until the next election, and then the judge that is on the ballot runs for a 6-year term. I was appointed in 1998 and then ran for my office again in 2000, and then 2006, 2012. Never had a contested election, but in theory it is possible. There are different views on whether or not election versus appointment versus continuation is the best, but that's kind of a political call, nothing to do with me as far as that goes. So the topic that Mike suggested, and it made sense to me, was, what does a judge do? And a lot of folks have not jaded, but a different view because of TV, which is you've seen Perry Mason and Matlock and Judge Judy and Judge Joe, or whoever the folks are, and they're either fiction or they're dramatized, I'll call it, for the TV viewing audience and the process. Most of what we do as a judge is pretty mundane, but I have to tell you, it's pretty intense, and it's something that we really keep busy at. We were at the courthouse, the historic courthouse, until 2010, I think, is when we moved up to the Justice Center. And right now there are 4 chambered judges up there. There are 5 courtrooms, because usually one courtroom is reserved like for a child support magistrate or a Social Security hearing, or another session that's in there, or a retired judge who comes in and fills in and things like that. And there are days when, every single room is full, everybody's busy. There's a jury waiting out in the jury selection room, and there's stuff going on all the time. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a retired but I still help out up there. Tomorrow I'm going in as to help. And even though I'm not a full-time person, I've got 80 hearings scheduled tomorrow, either initial hearings or probation violation hearings, in custody hearings. If somebody gets picked up on a warrant, they're entitled to a hearing to see what bail or release conditions or appointment of a lawyer would be. Some people will come back for a second hearing to see if they want to plead guilty or not guilty, usually with their attorney and things like that. But just use the math, and I was a math major, so it kind of helps me. You start at 8:30 and you go till noon, and then you maybe start again at 1 o'clock and go till 4:30. You got about 7 hours of work time. And so if you've got 80 to 90 hearings, and I've had more, that tells you you've only got about 4.5 minutes for each individual hearing. So it's just like a kaboom, 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 kaboom. We really try to keep it moving so it doesn't get bogged down. Now I'm doing almost everything by Zoom like this, and I was very skeptical. I'm an old guy, I gotta admit, but I have to tell you, it really has worked out quite well. And the younger folks, who unfortunately are some of the ones that end up using our services, are far more technologically astute than a lot of my generation because of their experience. They grew up with it and have used it a long time. So anyway, the Zoom process does work pretty well. There's glitches. If you have a technology issue, if you have a problem with connection that just doesn't work for some reason, we just try to work around it. And if we have to reschedule something, we'll reschedule it. I probably should stop jabbering here and just mention a couple of things. First of all, is the volume okay with everybody? If not, you got to yell at me and I'll do what I can.
You're fine.
Like I say, we've only got a few folks here, so don't be bashful. If you got any questions at all, please ask it, and we'll go ahead and do what we can to answer that before we move on to another topic. So I made a few notes. 90% of what a judge does in our county anyway has to do with the criminal justice system. Traffic cases, assaults, thefts, robberies, violations of orders for protection or harassment orders. And you read the paper as much as everybody. You see what the front page of the local section is about who got arrested for what, for fleeing a peace officer, or got in a fight in one of the downtown entertainment districts, or there's always the bigger article usually means it's a more serious charge as far as that goes. The criminal justice system, and unfortunately, alcohol and drugs drives the system. If we didn't have alcohol or drugs, we wouldn't need 5 judges up here. We could get by with 1.5, and the police force would be working part-time, and they wouldn't need near as many prosecutors. It's just the way of the world. Folks don't use very good judgment sometimes when they're under the influence or using substances that cause them difficulty. And again, the criminal justice system, as I said, it runs the gamut of adult system and then juvenile system. If you're under 18, there's a juvenile system, same judge, but no jury, and the penalties obviously are very different for kids as they would be for adults. Most of the time, the problems that kids have are also possession of substances when underage, curfew violations, occasionally have something that's coupled with a mental illness issue. The child, maybe 15 and 5'10" and 220 pounds, still a kid, and they get into a squabble with their mom or their brother or their dad or something, and because of the circumstances, law enforcement has to get called to calm them down, I'll say, or take them into custody so they can be calmed down. I'll skip around a little bit. I mentioned the substances, alcohol and drugs, controlled substances. Mental illness, unfortunately, is also a serious driver of our workload. And it's become more apparent during this pandemic because a lot of the services that folks were able to get before COVID aren't available or to be utilized. And that causes the individual with the mental health issue to have more potential for crisis or more potential for problems if they can't maintain their therapy or their counseling or the activity that is helping them stay on the straight and narrow. It can cause a little bit of a problem, and I don't mean to be glib, but I'll tell you a story anyway. This happened before COVID, but we had a young woman who was had a mental health issue, and she was in a treatment center, northern Minnesota, Fargo or someplace like that, even in North Dakota, because of the availability of a bed. So rather than drive up there for 7 hours and drive back for 7 hours, have a 5-minute hearing on the issue of whether or not she should stay in custody or not, and then drive her 7 hours back, etc. We just did it by what we called interactive TV, which was a precursor to Zoom type thing. So I'm on a Zoom and she's on a Zoom, I'll call it, from Fargo. And I'm looking at the petition, and the problem was she claimed that she could talk to her TV and her TV would talk back to her. And so I'm sitting there thinking, that's exactly what we're doing now, and expecting her to understand what's going on. So every once in a while you end up with a little situation which is out of the ordinary, and it always sticks in the back of my mind because it was so unique.
Hey, Brad.
Sir.
I was going to ask before, as you were talking about doing these proceedings via Zoom, is everybody at their different location? I would assume if the defendant is in custody, that perhaps there's a location at the jail or somewhere that they utilize, or how does that all, who's where?
Well, that's a good question, and yes, they are all over. Folks that like Mr. Sandry there, if he's got a problem, he would just do it from his living room, just like right now. If somebody's in custody in the jail has a couple of separate rooms set up with a court iPad that has the ability to connect with the Zoom meeting, etc. And there's a bailiff or a transport officer there to monitor, etc. If somebody is traveling, like Ms. Murdersdorf, apparently in her car, she can connect through, with just pull off the side of the road and they have their iPhone up or their iPad connected, however the technology works, and we'll visit with them there. Sometimes folks are represented by attorneys at the hearing, and they'll go to the attorney's office and they'll both connect together. What was the other? Oh, some folks just flat out don't have either the technology or the capability or the confidence that they can connect adequately. And so we'll allow them to come up to the Justice Center, and there's a couple of conference rooms that are set up with a court iPad that will set up and connect that way. So those are the general ways where pretty much everybody has some ability to connect one way or the other.
All right, thank you.
So when they have an attorney, are they usually together, or would the attorney connect separately too?
It's about 50-50. Sometimes the attorney connects separately, but more than half the time, probably the attorney and the client are together, because depending on the type of hearing, they may need to consult and talk about. For instance, I've also got the prosecutor sitting here on a Zoom call.
Oh,
And again, with the ability to put folks in a breakout room, Mike probably knows how this happens. If Mr. Sandry wanted to talk to me about his racquetball game or his activities, Mike can put the two of us in a separate room, and he and I can be the only ones that talk back and forth about pickleball or whatever his question would be. And then we come back and like that. The
okay.
technology is pretty amazing, to be honest with you. So can you do that, Mike?
I have never set up a breakout room, but I'm sure it probably is very intuitive, like most things Zoom are.
I've never done it either. I've never acted as host. We've always got staff who are helping me. Like if we're doing this right now and I would call Mr. Brielmeyer's case, he would go off mute and I would talk with him. I've got Mr. Lagerquist, let's assume that he's the prosecutor, so he'd be listening in. And if Mr. Brielmeyer's attorney, Mr. Sandry, is separately, he'd be listening in. And then behind me, or actually in another room, I've got a court reporter who's recording everything. And I've got a couple of assistant court administrators who are taking notes on what happens. So if all Mr. Brielmeyer does, let's say, is tell me that he wants to plead not guilty and have a trial. So then the staff would put that down in their minutes, and it would get assigned to another judge who would send out these notices for the next hearing. If there's a deal, Mr. Sandry agrees to plead guilty and the prosecutor agrees to it, he'd tell me what he did, and then I'd say, okay, well, this is the sentence, blah, 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 and pay it all within 90 days or something like that. And they're taking notes so they can put it in the court minutes and in the individual court file. Pretty efficient, but busy system that we work with.
Have you had the procedure contested at all? I mean, have people, I don't know how, I mean, you could mute yourself or whatever, but has anybody that, since you've been doing this, had a real big issue with the Zooming?
Not with me. I don't know if the other judges have. Initially, there was a court rule that requires the way it's worded, it seems to require that a public defender, if a court-appointed attorney is designated for the defendant, and the defendant have to be in court with the judge, staring him in the face, or her. And so the governor and the Supreme Court Chief Justice made some modifications to those rules for the technology reason, to make it not necessary. I kept waiting for the public defenders to object to it, just because. I don't have an axe to grind with public defenders, but if they can buck up the system, sometimes they'll consider that. Well, they found out that, gee, this works a lot better for us than having to run back and forth to Marshall, Minnesota, or Fairmont, or wherever their next hearing would be. They can just sit in the confines of their own fireplace room and have their hearing with multiple people a lot more efficiently. And so they've bought into the system and haven't had any arguments about it at all. At least me. I'm not saying that any of the other 215 judges might have had some issue, but so far it's pretty good.
So what about if there's like a witness that needs to be called? Can they be called on Zoom?
They can be called on Zoom. Now, I probably should make it a little more clear. As a retired judge, I'm I'm kind of filling in and keeping the system moving. I don't have any cases assigned to me. Mine are usually initial appearances, bail settings, and that type of thing. So I don't have any witnesses taking testimony, under oath or anything like that. If there's a contested hearing, for instance, we just talked about Mr. Brillmeyer pleading not guilty to his horrendous crime. And so his case then would be assigned to a judge, and the judge would actually have a separate Zoom hearing a couple months down the road, maybe, with lawyers, witnesses, defendant, and anybody else that was necessary if the matter had to be contested. We're just starting to have jury trials at the Justice Center. I think next week there are 2 scheduled. We've had a couple for some reason early on, but usually we try, because of COVID, get with so many people in a confined period or location, it just doesn't really work. It's the jury trial. I don't know if anybody's been paying any attention to the one that's going on up in Hennepin County, but it's very difficult to, I don't know how it is to explain, when you just can't have that many people in a confined area. Normally you'd have the whole jury in the room and 25 people watching on each side of the aisle, but you just can't do it with the distancing requirements as far as that goes.
So how do they have a jury in there?
Well, they spread them out. They spread them out in the room, so there's everybody is 6 feet apart from everybody when they're asking questions or they're listening to testimony. And the case up in the cities is a felony, so that means you need 12 jurors, plus you've got a couple of alternates. Most of the cases that we would do down here are not felonies, so you only need a 6-person jury. So you, by definition, you don't need quite as many folks in the room when you're going through that. Don, you had a question?
Yeah, going back to the part where you said that if we didn't have drugs and alcohol, it would probably be a lot less hearings. How do you feel about, I think that Minnesota is considering recreational marijuana. I'm not sure. It seemed to me, I read that they were considering it. But what would your feelings be on that? I mean, would someone that's now picked up for minimal charge of marijuana, whatever that would be, would that just wouldn't happen? Would that help? I mean, in the sense of hearings, numbers.
Well, I'll give you my honest opinion is my concern isn't about somebody sitting in their house smoking marijuana or whatever they do. I'm maybe naive. Went through the 60s and I wouldn't even know what marijuana smells like. I've never had it, never used it or anything like that. My concern is it does impact on folks' ability to act, quote, normally or rationalize, and it would impact on their ability to operate a motor vehicle. But you can't test for it. If it's legal, then how do you stop somebody from driving over me and my grandkids when they're using and shouldn't be? That's my biggest concern.
I guess we can hope it won't pass.
Pardon?
I guess we can hope that it won't come to that. But
it's changed a lot in the last 20 years. I mean, the marijuana possession used to be a serious felony, and now, depending on the amount and the history of the defendant, the prosecutor uses it like a catch and release almost, as long as they're not behind the wheel. And the penalties are knocked down. Some people have the attitude that it's a racial thing, depending on the marijuana specifically, but the type of drug or controlled substance that folks have. I've never had an issue in Blue Earth County that I thought a prosecution or an arrest or anything like that was motivated by race. All I see is the end case, but there's some concern that folks have that is an issue. All I can say.
So did you say there's no test to show if somebody is under the influence of marijuana?
You can take a blood test to do it, but a blood test is time consuming, it's expensive, and it takes a while for the results to get back. And it's problematic in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's different. We've got a standard in Minnesota that if you've got alcohol concentration over 0.08 and you're behind the wheel of a vehicle, you're presumed to be, well, even if you're not under the influence, you're a heavy drinker and no problem, you're still breaking the law if your blood alcohol concentration is over 0.08. I don't know how you convert that to marijuana. Marijuana use or consumption is measured in something called nanograms per milliliter. I'm not a chemist, so I can't tell you what if the standard is 50 or 30 or 200. And as I understand it, alcohol pretty much gets out of your system in 15 to 24 hours. Marijuana, if you're a heavy user, stays in your system for 30 days. So I don't know how you, well, he had it a week ago last Thursday, but you're still heavy user enough to have it in your system. I haven't really thought it through, and I kind of, John's question was a very good question, but I hadn't really thought about it for quite a while. My conservative bent is to that marijuana should be like any controlled substance, that you can't have anything in your system if you're behind the wheel of a car. If that's going to be the law, well, then I could probably live with that.
Thank you.
What do we got here? I'm jabbering on here. The criminal cases, I just want to, I grabbed my calendar for tomorrow just to give you a little idea. What I've got 20 cases scheduled at 8:15, between 8:15 and 9:30. And I got a theft, I got theft of a motor vehicle, I got tampering with a motor vehicle, I got trespass, disorderly conduct, neglect of a child, driving after revocation, speed, underage consumption, another trespass, theft, criminal sexual conduct, domestic assault. So that's the first session. So you can see it's not that we're only doing DWIs, we're only doing driving offenses, we're doing a lot of different stuff, and it's in a short period of time as far as that goes. I won't go through the rest of the calendar, but it gives you a little sense of the types of things that we go along with. Now, the theft can be anything from shoplifting, which unfortunately is all too common as well, or I had a lot of cases over the course of my 20 some years of an employee stealing from the employer in some fashion, either just grabbing money out of the till as a person that's running the cash register, or the bookkeeper that was falsifying entries or things like that, and up to several $100,000, unfortunate. So I can't tell by looking at those exactly what the charge is. Now, when I get to the courthouse in the morning, I've got the ability to have my screen like we're looking at now with the ability to talk with everybody, and then off to the side. I'm gonna move this here. I don't know if you can see, I've got a screen over there on my work table at home. It's not set up right now because I've got my laptop at the courthouse, but I'll have that one set up so I can look at the individual case information, and I can know exactly what the charge is. I can know exactly when it happened. I can know exactly what this individual's record is. Is this the first shoplifting, or is it the 4th or the 14th? Are they on probation for something? And I'm pretty good at trying to get as much information as I can. I've been doing it long enough to understand the individual defendant and the individual case, rather than just looking at a piece of paper that says shoplifting. So that's another ability with technology, to have more than one screen where you can go back and forth to keep up with what's going on.
Well, Brad,
you're
are
the-
a lot of those cases contested, or does a lot of it come before you and it's a, yes, Your Honor, I did that, and you can dispense with it, or?
With what I do, just these initial hearings, a lot of the driving after revocation, speeding, shoplifting, for that matter, what I call minor offenses. It's a matter of degree, of course. Very often they will enter a plea of guilty, and I'll sentence them right tomorrow morning. Sometimes they will say, I want to talk with a public defender, but I can see it's a minor shoplifting. They took candy from the 7-Eleven or whatever it is. I've got a public defender that's on the screen. I've got the prosecutor on the screen, so I can say, Miss Court Reporter, can you put Mr. Defendant, Mr. Prosecutor, and Mr. Defense Counsel in a breakout room, see if they can talk about this and work it out. I'm trying to make it easy on the system so we don't have to go through this multiple hearings, et cetera, and make it easier on me so we can get it done today if possible. Some folks, they know they did it, but they kind of want to know, well, what am I going to expect? And you can't really ask the judge, well, what's going to happen to me if I plead guilty? Because I'm not supposed to telegraph what my ruling's going to be. So I always defer to the prosecutor and public defender, see if they can come to some sort of an agreement, and it'll come back with something like, yeah, the client will plead guilty. He's agreed to a sentence that will be no jail and a $200 fine, hypothetically. And unless there's something way off base, I'll almost always adopt or accept the plea arrangement or the recommendation that's being made.
So if they go like to a breakout room, do you have to wait then for them to come back, or can you go on with your schedule?
I go on with the schedule because they're off and they're going to spend 5 minutes over there. So I'll go to the next case and try to get a couple more cases done while they're visiting. So, and again, sometimes it'll happen. They'll have back to back people that want to talk to the prosecutor or want to talk to the public defender. And, or some people say, no, I want a public defender, and they don't want to talk to anybody about getting it resolved today. I'm not in a position to twist anybody's arm. I'm just trying to encourage the efficiency of the system, is what we're doing.
So in the system, you're generally the first person they see, right?
Well, for the hearing, yeah. I mean, I'm the first person they'll talk to, because the process is everybody will show up on the screen like we've got right now. I may have up to 30 people, so it's pretty small pictures, but I'll go through what we call a right sheet. I'll tell everybody that they've got a right to counsel, what the maximum penalty is. They can ask for a lawyer, represent themselves. They can hire a lawyer on their own, and go through what their rights that we're required to give them. And then I'll ask each individual what they want to do. If they want to represent themselves, they want to hire a lawyer on their own, or if they qualify for a public defender. Not everybody's entitled to a public defender. If you make too much money, you don't qualify. You're on your own, or you have to hire an attorney on your own. I'm pretty liberal on granting public defenders in very serious cases. Like you heard me go through the list, and there was a couple of criminal sexual conduct cases. Depending on how serious the case is, if it's the very serious what used to be called rape, that's a first degree matter. And somebody's going to go to prison if they're found guilty. I'll almost always appoint a public defender, even if they're on the borderline of qualifying because of their income. If it's a less serious matter, then I will follow the guidelines, and they'll have to hire an attorney on their own.
Are you able to separate yourself from all cases, or do some of them ever bother you? You know, just that the person did it.
Do I have sleepless nights about
Yes.
how cases ended up? Not anymore. I mean, when I used to go all the way through with the case, and the person, the consequences or the person's guilt or innocence didn't match up with my decision. The typical one that really bothers me the most, and I don't mean to be bouncing around, is the abuser. Very often, and not trying to be sexist, but very often it's a husband or boyfriend or that is abusive to a partner, whether it be wife, girlfriend, or whatever. And it's a second time or the third time, but the victim won't cooperate and won't testify. And there's nothing I can do about it. Those cases bother me. For the most part, in 22 years of actual judging, when we had a jury trial, the jury pretty much gets it right. I had a couple of cases, I'll be honest, that I thought the jury just got flim-flammed. Either civil cases or criminal cases. But for the most part, juries, it's a collective wisdom, and everybody talking with each other and listening to the same evidence and talking about what they feel is the situation. They generally get it right. So that's what I'll tell you about that. I don't know if that kind of answered your question, Mr. Brielmeyer, or not, but it's...
Yes, it did. Yes, that did answer. I think it's very good.
You can't, as a judge, you heard me, I go through 80 cases a day. You can't agonize over every speeding ticket. Was he really going 65 in a 60? You've got to make your decision and move on for the most part. That's the way it works. You're on mute, John.
I got it. Ask you a question about what's going on in Minneapolis. Obviously, it's going to take a long time to seat a jury.
Well,
what do you think about that?
Well, there's multiple levels of what I think about it, I suppose. Actually, in my view, the first day that they were going through jury selection, they picked three. Based upon the seriousness of the offense, based upon the pretrial publicity, based upon the entire circumstances of this case. Picking, if they can pretty much get the jury picked this week, 3 a day gives them the 12 people that they need by the end of the week, and the other two that they're going to pick are going to be alternates, I think they're moving along pretty fast, to be honest with you. I know the judge personally, very capable judge. So I've got confidence that the trial is going to be conducted well. I've got a little bit of concern about this argument that they're having at the appellate level now about whether or not this third-degree murder charge should be activated and in the case. As I recall, the grand jury put the third-degree case in, and then the judge tossed it out. But then the Court of Appeals said in that Noor case, which was a different fact situation, but it's still the same statute, allowed it. And so I think the appellate court is going to indicate that that charge should be reinstituted. I don't want them to get too far along in the trial before they get that thing resolved. Is my concern.
Oh, why would that make a big difference?
Well, because the reason that it's in there is that each charge has different elements. You've got to show that and in the third degree charge, one of the elements is basically depraved indifference to the rights of the victim. You can't get by on that on second degree. Second degree, you have to show intention to cause the harm or the death of the defendant. And there's a legal difference between intent and being indifferent to. Now that's real vague, but you can't get the testimony started based upon intent, and then all of a sudden come back with a new elements. So you kind of got to start all over if that would happen, in my mind. Now again, I'm looking at the paper and the TV too, so I don't know what all of the filings are, but that's a kind of a layman's with experiences answer to that question. Picking a jury isn't so bad. That they can go along, and then, but it's when the judge starts giving instructions and they start taking testimony and opening statements that they got to have it together. There's a way that judges can add charges after you hear the testimony. And I'll give you a real easy example. If you get tired of listening to me, you can just go off on mute and everything like that. But an easy one is you charge somebody with second degree assault. And that means the assault by the defendant on the victim caused serious bodily harm. That's the elements. Well, let's say you get to the trial and the testimony from the doctor or the testimony from two doctors, one for the prosecution and one for the defendant, say, well, yeah, there was bodily harm, but it really wasn't that serious. He had there was a cut on his arm, but it healed up real well. He didn't have to have stitches. He didn't have any long-term disability because of it. Well, if it's bodily harm and not serious bodily harm, then instead of second degree assault, it's fifth degree assault, which is a less penalty and less serious. But because that's what we call a lesser included offense, the judge can just add that because the elements are the same except for the severity. But that's different in this Floyd thing, or because of the intent versus indifference.
Thanks.
So, and we talked a lot about running. Am I behind or late? Are we good?
You are right on time.
All right, I'll give you a couple other things here. Now, we don't, as a judge, you don't only do criminal stuff. There's other stuff that happens up there. And I would invite everybody, when this COVID thing is done, come on up to the Justice Center, sit in the back of the courtroom and watch. It's amazing how it answers questions that you've got in the back of your mind. Never, gosh, I didn't, now I understand why he said that or why they do that. If you watch it, it's really kind of interesting. And it's generally, except for this COVID thing, it's a public hearing, so you're all welcome as far as that goes.
Is he the judge for your time?
Other than, and also I'd invite everybody to don't get all excited if you get called for jury duty. Anybody been called for jury duty?
Twice.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever serve, John?
Yeah, I was on both trials, I was thrown off as apparently I was an alt or ended up being well, they had to throw two people off both times.
Okay.
I was one person. I was selected both times. I sat there and went through the whole trial, and then I was told I was excused.
Well, that's kind of frustrating because of that, but
Yes.
the alternate is extremely necessary because of, a long trial. And I've had it happen. Somebody got sick or somebody couldn't get to the Justice Center. We had to use the alternate as a juror. And that's why the system works that way. Your wife's been on the jury as well?
She did that murder trial here in Mankato a year ago, 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
Long time ago.
Okay. Anyway, I hope the experience, maybe not as good for you, John, was enlightening and it was a good experience for anybody.
Do you
Because
Very much.
Do you
was.
allow people to volunteer for jury duty? I know in Wisconsin, when I was down there, where I was on the jury, you could volunteer to be on a jury.
our court administrator does the jury selection, and basically it's a fancy program that gets names off of voting lists and auto license lists and property owner lists and stuff like that. And I know there's a way you can opt out. I'm over 70. I can say, I don't want to serve on a jury. I've done my time. Or I've got a serious health problem. I can't sit for more than 10 minutes. And it's something that you can't make an accommodation for. So they give you a pass on that. But most of the time I would urge everybody to try to be on a jury if you can. Don't make a special effort to get thrown off, I guess.
I was disappointed after sitting there all that time.
I'm sure. Well, that's probably a story for another day as far as that goes. Anyway, besides the stuff we've talked about on criminal matters, civil matters, the car accidents, the slip and fall cases, the anything that goes on the civil side, real estate arguments. Where's the boundary line between the neighbors? It's not a big deal to me and the guy next to me on Normandy Court here, but farmers get all excited if their 40 acres is all of a sudden a foot and a half short on one end of the south quarter or something like that. So we do all of those types of cases. Collection cases, people that owe money that don't pay money, the collection agency or the person that has the note or the bank or somebody will bring an action to try to collect their money or get a judgment so they can have the ability to collect the money that they are owed if people aren't cooperating. Real estate, I talked about boundary line disputes, but condemnation, the state or the county decides to widen the road and they need an extra 20 feet on either side of the right of way. And so they have to acquire it from the adjacent landowners. And so could have a trial on value of what is taken. Landlord tenant. I'm surprised we haven't had more because of this COVID thing with I don't know if it was on the federal, I think it was in the federal statute, they stopped evictions, and I think Waltz did it too statewide for non-payment. Technically, it's non-payment because of COVID and unemployment because of COVID. So folks that if they do something else, they break the window in the house because they're drunk or out of control some night, so the landlord wants them out because they're causing damage to the property. That's different. It can still be evicted, or so it's not only it's not a complete free pass right now on the ability to not pay rent and stay in the property. Other things that we do that are probably common sense, but a little folks in crisis. Again, mental illness. I gave you the example before. Folks that are have chemical dependency problems, can't manage themselves, can't take care of themselves. Very often the county or a county worker or a relative will ask to have them committed as mentally ill or for inebriety or something like that. And so we'll go through a process to kind of, the goal is to get the person that we're talking about help so they can overcome their difficulties. Most of the time, mental illness, it's to get back on their meds and to take care of themselves. Most folks with proper medication and therapy can act accordingly in society. But then they get a thought process that says, well, I'm all right, so I can stop taking my meds. And then you start a downward spiral again. And so we see folks over and over again, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Gosh, I got my notes here. Well, the one that I really don't like to talk about, but unfortunately we see a lot of too, is family law issues. I haven't got any of those since I've been retired, but when I was working full time, family law difficulties, divorces, child custody, child visitation, or related matters were always more difficult than serious criminal cases. Most people, I always tell people, criminals know they did something wrong, and very often they're willing to bite the bullet and accept their consequences. Family law matters, you don't have any logic or common sense. It's almost entirely emotion. And I'm not pointing fingers at either side. It's usually both sides as far as that goes. And that, unfortunately, you've usually got a situation where the youngsters are caught in the middle. And so the judge is kind of the mediator, the arbitrator. That's not the right word for a judge, but trying to get these folks to act their age and work out something that's in the best interest of the kids. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've got the ability to appoint a guardian ad litem to protect the kids and make a recommendation for what is best for the kids. And so we do that almost in any case that we can. The more information that I can get about what is best for that youngster or those siblings, the better.
Brad,
Fun stuff. Go ahead.
I've heard good things about the drug court they've got up there. I don't know if that's anything that you can speak about or.
Yeah, we've got 3 separate, what we call specialty courts up there. A drug court, which is obviously based upon a clientele that has difficulties with controlled substances or alcohol. About 10 years ago now, I started a veterans court, which was geared to military veterans going through some of the same chemical issues, but a lot of times aggravated with post-traumatic stress because of combat situations or difficulties from being in combat after discharge and things like that. And there's always also a family dependency treatment court. Again, this family situation, the dynamics that we just talked about, trying to get folks off alcohol, off drugs, into a situation where they can be better parents for the children, as far as that goes. Anyway, I can't remember actually, after I left, based upon when I was there, they got an award for something in the state. I think our our Veterans Court had the best rate of non-recidivism in the state. It's basically it boils down to how good your probation folks are at monitoring these folks. I thought it helped that I was a veteran and I could talk to Joe about what a squadron did, what part of boot camp was difficult, what part of training as a helicopter squadron personnel was effective, just stuff that we had in common because I did it. Unfortunately, we've got 17 judges in our district now, and I was the last veteran. There's no veteran that is a current judge in the district. Now there are statewide, of course, but in our district, which basically is St. Peter down to Iowa through Blue Earth and over towards Marshall and South Dakota, that whole corner of the state, that's just the way it is. The generation, my generation, I basically joined right during Vietnam, and there aren't that many more.
Well, it seems effective because there are things that are caught up in the legal system, but it really is a matter of treatment.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I indicated early on. If we get rid of alcohol and controlled substances, and it would really go a long way to solving a lot of the counties or the district's problems. We probably are never going to get it all done, but all we can do is keep trying. I got to mention that there's some fun stuff that I get to do. I get to do adoptions. Unfortunately, sometimes I have to terminate parental rights when I feel that it's in the best interest of the child to not have that biological mom or dad. But then I turn around and I get to do the adoption for the foster family or for folks that are adopting kids. I do weddings. Can still do weddings as a judge or retired judge, and that's fun, I guess. At least I'm not throwing anybody in physical jail as far as that goes. Every once in a while, I get called on to swear in public officials, the county attorney, the North Mankato council or mayor, or somebody that's going to be a commissioner in a condemnation hearing or something like that. Judges all serve on like statewide committees. I was on the statewide judicial council for 4 years, which is a group of chief judges from the individual districts that help set policy and processes throughout the state. So that's kind of I've gone through my notes, so I'll let the rest of the time be for questions. If somebody's got some that I've skimmed over that you want to ask about, or if you think of other topics that you'd want Mike to work on getting this person to talk with you about.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask you one thing is that, in your house, though, your authority probably doesn't go so far with Karen, does it?
Why do you think I'm in the basement? I don't know if she's up there, if she can hear me or not.
You're probably better off if she doesn't.
Yeah, I think you're right. I should have kept my mouth shut. Maybe with a little bit of luck, she left.
Do you do anything with, I'm sorry, go ahead. Do you do anything with financial, like bankruptcy, stuff like that?
Bankruptcy is all federal, so that we don't do. The closest thing I come to with financial is splitting up a bunch of property in a divorce. That's what the judge has to do. And I guess that's really the biggest one. Everything else is pretty much settled by the lawyers, or a jury gets to decide.
Barb, do you have something you wanted to say, or?
Oh, I just think we should interview Karen next. Another.
I guess I would ask Brad, through your years as being a judge, what are the biggest misperceptions or misconceptions that people have about what a judge is and what he does or he and she does?
Well, I don't know. I guess I tried to be Judge Walker when I was wearing my black dress here, but I tried to be Brad when I was outside of the courtroom, whether I was bowling with you, Mike, or whether I was at church with John and his wife. I think it's important for the judge to also take the robe off and be part of the community and to let people know that, you know, we're human. We're not just this staid guy in a black robe with a grimace on his face looking down from a bench on high. Whether I was successful or not, I'm not sure, but that I think is important. A lot of folks just look at think everybody's Judge Judy and is a grump all the time, and I hope that's not the case.
Oh, John's muted again.
Sorry about that. When you were in the Marines, were you a JAG?
I started out as a lawyer in the JAG portion of the Marine Corps. I ended up being a squadron commander, and when we got called up for Desert Storm, I had a 700-man helicopter repair squadron, basically, that got called up and went to active duty during that time. Hard to believe it's 30 years ago.
Wow.
I retired 35 years ago. I mean, I think it's hard to believe it's that long.
It flies by. It really does. Anything else, folks? Don't be bashful. I'm going to charge Mike the same amount whether you quit early or not. So,
Well, for me, just the aesthetics part of it, moving from the historic courthouse to the Justice Center would have been tough, going from a beautiful ornate courthouse to something that's much more plain and perhaps sterile.
yeah, I liked the courthouse. Of course, I grew up with that, and that's where I was for the first 10 years of my judicial career. Beautiful facade, beautiful facility, but it was built in 1880. Not built for air conditioning. I had bats flying around in my chambers. I had, you can imagine how tough it is to air condition and heat a structure that's made out of limestone and probably more bad stuff than I want to talk about that they've got in the roof up there. The courthouse or the Justice Center was a real good transition. A couple of reasons. First of all, it's a lot more secure for judges. Still needs some attention to security as far as I'm concerned. But the jail is coexistent with it. If I want somebody, before COVID, I needed somebody to come up for a hearing, they come right up an elevator and come right in my courtroom. Back before that, they were down, well, you know the math. What is it, about 8 blocks away if you go over and down to where the jail was? Now what do they call it? Law Enforcement Center now? No, they call
Public
it
safety.
Public Safety Center, yeah. And that meant because for transport purposes, you got to take a deputy sheriff or 2 deputy sheriffs off the road, and they have to bring people back and forth. And it's a lot easier just to do it with what we're doing now. Hindsight's always 2020. They had 40 acres up there. I think they should have made the building, the Justice Center that we're in, about time and a half again as big.
Ouch.
Because right now, like I say, we've got 4 judges there, and our caseload in Blue Earth County, based upon the growth and the seriousness of the offenses, is about 5.4 judge need. And so that's why they're using a retired judge, and we're kind of juggling courtrooms a lot if we're not doing it by Zoom. It's just the way it worked out. The caseload and you could kind of see it with Mankato being a hub for this area, that there would be growth in population, students. Unfortunately, that usually means growth in crime or difficulties.
Do you see the caseload going up once we get back to some kind of normalcy?
Well, I think there's going to be a huge lump in the snake, because a lot of the cases that have happened, because we're prohibited for a while from having jury trials, are just sitting out there in an accordion getting backed up. And once you unleash that, then there's the potential to, everybody's going to want to get their case done first or whatever. So I think there's going to be a lot of cases. I don't know what's going to happen after another year and a half. There's a challenge to the legislature to decide what a crime is. When I'd go to arraignment court in the morning, I'd have 100 cases, but 20 of them were underage consumptions from the college. 20 of them were driving after revocation, driving after suspension, driving after cancellation, driving without insurance, which were not people crimes. Nobody was beating anybody over the head with a hammer. They were offenses. So what the Supreme Court and the legislature did during my tenure was to make those cases, a lot of those cases, what we call payables. If it's your first underage consumption, John, you can just go pay a $150 fine, and you don't even have to come to court if you want to plead guilty. And even if you do want to plead guilty, you can come to court, but it takes a lot more time for you, for the prosecutor, for the judge, instead of just putting your credit card in a slot and paying $150. I suspect that when this is done, and there might be a little bit of a glut, there'll be an adjustment. You've made the best example. What'll happen with recreational marijuana? Maybe they'll make recreational marijuana under a gram or an ounce or whatever the amount is, not a crime. I don't know.
Well, I will say that it is that Brad being a person when he's not in the robe came true for me, because one day, I can't remember where I was working, but the phone rang, and the gentleman at the other end says, "This is Judge Bradley Walker. I just wanted you to know," I mean, we knew each other, so he was just acting officially. And he said, "Something is coming before me tomorrow or something. And I wanted to give you a heads up. You might want to get it taken care of before I have to send somebody out to get you," or whatever the case was in that instance. I think it was something about a vehicle that I had sold, and something with the person who had bought it gotten a bunch of parking tickets, I think is what it was. So it's good to have a judge in your corner. I'm not going to say your back pocket, because that was not the case.
Well, thanks everybody for your attention and your insightful questions and everything like that. We appreciate it. And I'll tell Karen that she got accolades from everybody.
Everything is relative. Thank you, Brad. I certainly appreciate your time, and hope you get through your cases tomorrow without any hangups.
Well, I do too. I appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Brian.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
You bet.
Thanks a lot.
I'm gonna try and stay on here just a minute, Mike.
Oh, okay. Then I will not end the meeting then.
Okay.
Or did you want to stay on with me, or?
Yeah, yeah.